everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. I am here with an incredible panel. I'm with some very illustrious people. Of course, our main guest is Professor Robert Kerr. He is from Canada. We have Paul Ellis from the UK. We have Odon, who is French, who is in Paris. We have JC, whose accent has been best described as bad Irish. He refuses to tell us where he is located. But it is the worst Irish accent we've ever heard, but we suspect he is Irish. And of course, myself, I am South African, based in Poland. And today we're going to be talking about, amongst other things, the nadhir, or the warner in the Quran. And Dr. Robert Kerr was with us last week. It was an incredible discussion. We learned a great deal. And we're very grateful to have him back. And we need to finish before the football starts. So, Dr. Kerr, over to you.
Yes. So I hope it's hot enough for everybody. And thanks for having me back and offering me a free sauna. Good. Yes. Is there anything we want to discuss before we get started, or?
We were just briefly talking about one of the reasons I'm not always popular with, although I do have a lot of friends on the other side of the aisle that do come on, like Usama, who'll be with us again next week. We're talking about Martin Luther, which would be a very interesting conversation to have in the future. And I think last week you raised so many fascinating academic insights and the findings you have, which are not that well known. We have discussed some of them here, but you added nuance, and I think all of us would love to, in the future, ask questions about that and dive into that again.
With pleasure. There's a huge problem with, there are two things, as I mentioned briefly at the beginning last week, if I remember correctly. We have this falsification here with this, what is now called Islamic studies at the university. Back in the good old days, it was what's now called Islamic studies was just Oriental philology. And one did work with texts and what have you. And now in Islamic studies, they always say, at least in French, they never essentialize Islam. And, so they do all kinds of weird things, the Islam of some tribe in Aceh, in Indonesia or what have you, but they never go to the core basics so they can avoid the hard questions. And what we discussed last week is when you look at, let's say, as I pointed out, there's no way the Quran comes from Mecca and Medina. It's impossible, linguistically, content-wise, theologically, and what have you. And then you're in Mesopotamia, basically, because northeastern Syria, that's the Arab island, it's called in Arab because it's cut with rivers. And this, we know, was a core part of the Assyrian Empire. But so we're in Mesopotamia. So before Islam, there was only 4,000 years of written history, basically. And when for example, if you go and do biblical studies at a serious university, if you do Old Testament, you also have to do a certain amount of Assyriology, cuneiform. And if you do, New Testament, you also have to do Hebrew and Aramaic. But nowadays, when you do entre guillemets Islamic studies, you just do Arabic, and it's hermetic, it's self-referential.
Mm-hmm.
You study the sources. So I remember when I studied, Oriental studies, as it was called in the good old days, which of course now colonialist or post-colonialist or whatever Said came up with. But Islamic studies wasn't considered interesting because everything was considered known. The only thing you could come up with was maybe an older or different manuscript confirming something you thought you already knew. So Islamic studies is becoming more dynamic, especially since Luxemburg's book, but it isn't. It's a long way there yet. So when an archaeologist actually digs in Mecca, then we're talking.
Right. Yeah. No. Go on.
I think we ended the last podcast by asking if there were any questions, and I've been listening to Professor Kerr talking for about 2 hours. And suddenly to be told you've got in the last minute, do you have any questions? It didn't really seem adequate to venture into it. But yeah, various things. But one thing, I don't know if you have had a chance to read Suleiman Dost's book, who he brought out a little earlier this year, called Before the Quran.
I haven't read it yet. I can't. No, I'm a bit behind with that.
Okay. The gist of it is that he accepts that there's lots of Aramaic words find their way into the Quran, but he says that none of them come through Syriac. Is his part of his thesis.
Whoa.
He says that there's no word in the Quran that couldn't be explained by going straight from Aramaic to Arabic, and most of the terminology, he says, could be justified by going through the south. By Ethiopic and Ge'ez and going round to South Arabian inscriptions, and he finds all the words in the Quran. And he says that Jeffries didn't really consider this in the depth that he thought that Suleiman Dost thought he should have done, and he's gone back and added to this. I just wondered if you had any, but your if Suleiman Dost, I guess, was correct on that, that would challenge the logical connection of the language is Aramaic, and therefore it must have come from the north, because he would say, well, it could just as easily have come from the south.
Yes, but okay, go ahead, Lloyd. Sorry, my apologies.
Apologies. I've been doing a series. I've been doing a series for some week, going through the source origin of every story in the Quran, be it a Zoroastrian source or a pagan source from Armenia, Jewish, ancient Christian, fairy tales, kiddies comics, you name it. I've been going through the source of all these stories, apocryphal tales, Gnostic, you name it. And there was one author that I covered, English priest, sources of the Quran. Hold on, sources of the, and this is Tisdall. And he mentions that, and I think it's possible Jeffries built on some of his work in that he said that if you look at certain of the language, much of the legal language in the Quran is clearly sourced from Zoroastrian region of the world, so basically Iran. You look at things that are architectural, that looks like it's taken from Ethiopia, and then all of the religious terminology is either like Greek or Hebrew or Syriac. So basically, and if you remove these particular foreign words, then the Quran becomes just a book with random words in it without any actual theology. So would that make any impact, Dr. Kerr?
No, well, I would, you could say, I mean, there are a certain amount of Persian words, but if I remember correctly, most of them are due to do with luxury items, maybe some legal terminology. But the general gist also is, so we have several problems, as I mentioned last week. So one thing is that the earliest church fathers, they always talk about Islam as a heresy. If it were outside of the Roman Empire, such as in Yemen, it would have just become another religion. So why would it be a heresy? It's clearly something within the Roman Empire. Secondly, with Yemen, of course, you know, this is what we briefly touched on last week. There are, you know, also in the Islamic narrative, they're all, you know, Christians come from the Najran to see Muhammad and what have you, apparently. And we've supposedly got Surat Al-Fil, the Surat of the Elephant, which apparently refers to an expedition from Yemen to Mecca. But as a friend and teacher of mine pointed out many years ago at a series of lectures in Paris, he would have pitied the poor elephant keeper, because I don't know how many thousands of liters of water an elephant drinks a day and how many hundreds of pounds of hay and bananas, which they would have needed an army to transport the elephant. And so if you look, for example, at Hannibal's crossing the Alps with his elephants from Marseille, you know, I don't know, the North Africans, they have something with Marseille, but we'll leave that to Odin to discuss. That's his field of research. But when he finally crossed, so when you read the reports of, they're largely secondary, but of Hannibal trying to cross the Alps with his elephants and trying to feed them, and eventually he got to Italy with one elephant barely alive, but it was enough to impress the Romans. But anyway, but the point being, it's tied, but Mecca is a long way from the Yemen. And one thing that has to be remembered, in this period we're discussing in late antiquity, it was largely the sea route. There was not a lot of things going up and down. And what would be the point of conquering Mecca, even if it existed as a large city at this time, which I think we can safely doubt, or I've published on that. The thing with Yemen, Paul, is that one has to look at the Yemeni inscriptions and one actually has to read them. And it's a lot of work, I know. And no, Abraha never mentions, but in the south of Yemen, they found some inscriptions with elephant drawings that usually without any convincing evidence get connected to this expedition. Of course, Abraha never went to Mecca or Medina, even if it existed. And of course, this is this rather amateurish attempt to connect events of the Islamic traditional narrative with historical events, which is rather silly. The point is, with these Sabaic inscriptions that we discussed last week, one has to see, we can't really date them. They're often hard to date, but they're usually roughly divided into a series of letters, sort of A being the oldest, B, C, and E is the latest phase. And that's called the monotheistic phase. And there we find a lot of Aramaic influence. For example, we find one inscription which is clearly Jewish, from the 3rd century, I believe, but where they use masjid in this term basically to describe a synagogue. And what we see is the theological vocabulary of Sabaic becomes Aramaified, or Aramaized, whatever you call that in English, in the latest period, let's say roughly from the 3rd or 4th century to the 7th century. It stops with Islam. So yes, you can find a lot of this vocabulary, but as I mentioned last week, the Christian vocabulary of Ethiopic, which is also a Semitic language, is also largely influenced by Aramaic, Syriac. And what is Syriac except for Aramaic? It's just a dialect of Eastern Aramaic, and it's actually quite closely related to the Aramaic of the Babylonian Talmud. It's so closely related that I remember a number of years ago, when I was working at the Leiden Library in the Netherlands, and we were given a present and an obscure thing, and it was all in Hebrew characters, and it was clearly a New Testament. But I thought, it's a bit weird. What is it? And what had happened was the British informed Bible Society in 1830 to an attempt to convert the Eastern European Jews who were then coming to Western Europe. I suppose everybody has to have a hobby, but they'd taken a Peshitta New Testament and they'd typeset it with Hebrew characters, with square script, and not in Syriac writing, with the idea the Jews will be able to read that because they know how to read the Talmud. So what I mean is, yes, to a certain extent, Syriac has a little bit of a different vocabulary, but the idea that it comes from Aramaic and not Syriac, well, Syriac is just Eastern Aramaic, so I'll have to read Dost's book, so I'll take a look at it by the next time, should you invite me. But I don't see the purpose of the argument, and you do find a lot of these terms in phase E of Sabaic, but it's clearly that phase E has undergone a semantic shift.
Right. So, obviously we'll be spending significant time, wanting to discuss these things. But do you want to talk about the nadhir? And also, hold on, by the way, before we forget, you have just released a new book in French on the origin of Mecca, or the lack of information about Mecca's origins.
Actually, it will be released at the end of August. I'm just finishing. The book is finished, but it's the last phase of the making of the book. So lots of stress and lots of work. But it will be ready at the end of August. And actually, our friend Robert Kerr proofread the book, and he found it excellent. And when he was talking about elephants, drinking a lot of water and needing a lot of hay, and he could also have added that horses cannot survive in Mecca.
No, horses and well, the amount of water they would have needed for these amount of horses or camels, and what were they eating?
Exactly. But even without a reference to elephants and Abraha, the idea of having horses in Mecca and even camels, it's ludicrous. It cannot be. It's impossible in Mecca. There is not enough water. There is not enough grazing lands, and so if horses cannot survive in Mecca, of course elephants can't. Of course.
Well, there's another. It's more of an anecdote, but so one of the things is that the prohibition of pork in Islam, and I remember when you read Pliny's natural history, when he's talking about Arabia and what lives in Arabia, and he goes, pigs can't survive in Arabia; it's too hot. So what would the prohibition on pork, why would one have that in a world where no pigs can survive? And of course, according to the Quran, what do you eat in paradise? Chickens. So where would you get chickens in Mecca? I mean, so the whole thing is, yes, the whole, as the Germans say, the Sitz im Leben is somewhere to the north. And I think
I think Professor Kerr is having some problems with the internet. He froze again.
Give him a moment, Sophie.
So, while we wait, wanted to mention, so we know that we have the problem with Mecca, and there is this thing with the story of Abraham going all the way to Mecca that we know is invented late, hence why they have to even introduce the Burak, because otherwise you cannot actually make the journey. So it would be good to know what academia thinks about that, because it seems like a very easy win. Every scholar would say, well, Abraham never went to Mecca, it's too far, it's impossible, and they invented the traditions to make Abraham go to Mecca. So, would you agree, gentlemen?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but the earliest reference to the Burak come out of, there's a poem written something like 100 years after the death of Muhammad, approximately. And so the Burak is referenced in a poem, but there's also within the Jewish texts, there's a, I have the notes, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but they speak of, in the sort of apocryphal Jewish stories, that they speak of this creature, which is a mythical idea. And so it looks like the Muslims took it as a literal idea.
No, but there's an even simpler solution to this, Lloyd, gentlemen. There's a much more simple solution to this. It's in the Talmud. If you'll give me a second, I'll find it.
Yeah. And also Burak is like lightning, so it's fast. So there's lots of different interesting aspects to the whole idea.
Yeah. One could go that way, but there's a much simpler solution. Let's give me a chance to find it.
Yeah.
Keep on talking. I'll just ignore me.
Yeah. So, by the way, you mentioned. So I have a whole series on Yemen, on the Yemeni influence on Islam, which is clearly there's some strong influences. So you have North and South, but the South has been typically neglected. Um, Most people sort of think that Islam doesn't have any existence prior to 570. And but on that point though, this is an interesting paper called Arabia Heresium Ferax, Arabia the Bearer of Heresies, and it speaks of schismatic Christianity's influence on Muhammad and the Quran. So once the heretics were kicked out of Rome, they went to Alexandria, they went to Haran, and there was a third location. Cannot remember offhand what it is, but no, well, I think the other one was Najran. So you had huge numbers of heresies or heretics that ended up in Najran. And I believe one of the early conflicts was over the book of Matthew or Mark, and you had like 7 different versions of it, and people had no idea which was the Christian version. And so there was lots of theological fights over this because these heretics had spread to 3 main centers.
Mm-hmm. 1 second, I think I've got it. Just give me a second here. 1 second, just so if you go to Lloyd, if you go to Sepharia again, okay, where are you? Okay, you go to Talmud, and you are the Babylonian Talmud. You scroll down. Sanhedrin, and then you click on 98a. And you go to verse 14.
Here we are.
Okay, so what we have here is Zamar le Shabur Malka de Shmuel Amatiu Mashiach al ha Hamra et Ati Eshtar le Susia Borka Li Amar le Mi it lach bar Hayavar Gavne. So they're discussing here, the rabbis are basically, to keep it simple, discussing here why the Messias will arrive at night, and they talk about a prophecy from Micah, I think, beforehand, and why he's going to ride on a donkey. And of course, there's a tradition, an old tradition, also with the Pseudo-Clementines and the Jewish literature, and some Christian literature, that the donkey of Abraham is the donkey of Samuel, is the donkey of everybody, even in the Christian tradition, Jesus. And of course, remember, and that'll be relevant today, later, Umar ibn al-Khattab apparently also rides into Jerusalem on a donkey. And basically, according to this, keep the Aramaic text there, Lloyd, please. Thank you. Thanks. Of course, the Persians, they're Indo-Europeans, so they like their horses, and donkeys are a little bit not high grade. And of course, the reason it is a donkey, it is why the king goes to parliament in a carriage, because cars are too new. But anyway, King Shapur, and in the Talmud, the king of Persia is always called Shapur. And he says, so, yeah, why is your Messiah, when he comes, coming on a donkey? You know, he's your king. That's not... So the Persians, they have, of course, no problem with other people's kings, because the king of Persia is the Shah and Shaheen, so the king of kings. So if somebody else is a king, fine. I'll greet my colleague. But why do you want him to come? Why is he supposed to come on a donkey? You know, if he's a real king, he's going to ride a horse like a good Persian king. And of course, what you see in the Talmud, you know, it is like American World War II films. All the Germans, they always speak with a German accent, which is a bit silly because, you know, Germans speak Germans with whatever accent they speak German with. But it's to give the local coloring. And here you find a similar phenomenon working in the Talmud. So if you look at the beginning of the second line of the Aramaic, you have susya. The first two words are fine there, Lloyd. The first word is susya. So I will send him the riding barka horse. But susya is the Aramaic word for horse, and burka, or barka, is the Persian word for horse. So burak is just the Persian word for horse. And all of this bit with flying horses and stuff is later embellishment. It's just,
Right.
and this is just another proof that this story comes from the north and not from the south.
Okay.
So here we have burak in the Talmud related to the Messiah in the Jewish tradition, and it's just the Persian word for horse, and they add the Persian word there because it's the Persian king that's speaking. So it's sort of like, imagine somebody speaking Aramaic with a heavy Persian accent, that type of idea.
Right. All right. I think that answers that. So shall we transition to the nadhir? Because I know we've all got lots of questions and we'd end up derailing the discussion. Shall we get to the main topic?
Okay.
And
Okay, I'll try to be brief and have you good. No, 1 second. This is the wrong one. Let me get the right one here. Let me figure out what I'm doing. Just bear with me a second. Sorry, I screwed that one up big time.
so thank you, Silver. Really do appreciate. That's £5. And yeah, there's a reference that I have in one of my notes where they say that Jesus is the donkey rider, but Muhammad is superior because he's the camel rider. So there is that idea of the donkey being very humble and Muhammad being superior. And, you know, so yeah, there is this idea. But yeah, it does seem to also play on all of these concepts. They're always trying to one up Jesus or one up Christianity.
Yes. So, 1 second. Just bear with me. I have to.
And some of in the Arabic notes that I have, the earliest references to the Burak within the Arabic context, I believe, is a poem by someone, and it's in reference to Abraham, not to Muhammad. And this comes like a century, 90 years after Muhammad dies. So, you know, and then it gets basically looks like it gets retroactively backdated onto Muhammad.
Okay, 1 second. I'm. Now what did I just had it, but I know I can't find it.
Okay. In the meantime, if I can speak for you, Robert, I just wanted to remind the audience of something you told me that I put in my book, The Great Secret of Islam. It's not the earliest mention to a Burak. I think it's the earliest mention to the servant of God traveling from a remote place to a sacred place as on eagle's wings. And it's in the Jewish tradition. I think in the Targum.
Well, I've published on that too, yes.
Yeah. And there is this Jewish idea that God's servant, in this case Moses, is sort of flying to the sacred place, the place where God is. And it's one has to remember that the night journey is a sort of development on Surah 17, verse 1, which literally is about Moses and not Muhammad. So lots
Oh,
of
I
connections
think
with
true.
Jewish
Yeah,
tradition here.
and this is interesting because this means that if you take this seriously, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is on the border with Egypt, where the Israelites are with Moses, and the Masjid al-Haram is Jerusalem, of course. And yeah, we can. Well, let's do that later, Odon. We can do that at the end.
Mhm.
Then I can find the
Yeah.
reference. So I'll just go here. I've got the good thing here
You know,
now.
I have to say thank you to Silver again very much. That's 50 pounds. Wow, thank you for the generosity. And he says the donkey symbolically for the Jews is the Messiah, saying for his kingdom to come, he needs a tame Ishmael, not the wild donkey of a man. Genesis 16:12. And Jesus conquered Jerusalem with peace on a donkey. Everyone else needs a sword and a horse. It's an interesting image. And yeah, so
Very good. Okay, so let's get started then. Okay, we will start with an example then of clearly an Aramaic loanword, and I'll show you the problem with distinguishing Syriac and other things. So in Surat al-Anfal, this is showing how you can invent Islamic history, first of all, and how you can make Islamic history. It's not so much Quranic exegesis, but it's Quranic eisegesis. It's reading things into the text. So we have Surat Al-Anfal 8:41. And know whatever ye take as spoils of war, lo, a fifth thereof is for Allah, and for the messenger, and for the kinsman who hath need, and orphans, and the needy, and the wayfarer, if ye believe in Allah, and that which we have revealed unto our slave, Abdina. Of course, Abd, Eved in Hebrew, is one of the terms slave used for Moses, especially in the Hebrew Bible in the Old Testament. It's basically only used for Moses. On the day of, according to the translation, discrimination, Yawm al-Furqani, when the two armies, Jam'ani, met, and Allah is able to do all things. So the key words here, good. Abd is for Moses here, good. Here the tradition. What will interest us here especially is the Yawm al-Furqan and the Jam'ani, the two armies. Of course, if you take a rather modern translation, not Pictal, I know that anything you obtain of war booty, then indeed for Allah is 1/5, etc., etc. And that which we have sent down to our servant on the day of criterion, i.e., decisive encounter, the day when the two armies met, in brackets, at Badr, and Allah over all things is competent. So this verse 841 is usually taken to refer to the Battle of Badr. It's connected in the exegesis with Al-Imran 3:123. Allah had already given you the victory at Badr. Actually, Nasrakumu, Allah has helped you, the Badrin, at Badr when you were contemptible. So observe your duty to Allah in order that you may be thankful. So the Battle of Badr, of course, is one of the battles where it's that Muhammad fights when he's in Medina against the Quraysh in Mecca, and it's usually he's seen as being in the minority, and so basically they raid a caravan of the Quraysh. So this criterion and what is being decided is usually seen because if you read the Islamic accounts in the Sirat and other where, you know, even angels join the battle, and there's all kinds of anecdotes there. But of course, what is this Battle of Badr? We only know about it from the Islamic tradition, where Badr exactly may or may not have be is still a matter of debate. Nobody has excavated that, etc. So basically, it's a raid because, of course, Muhammad, according to the Islamic tradition, when he's in Medina, he has to keep his followers fed and happy, and they're not going to take a day job. So he supported them by plundering caravans. So we have here again, Surah 841, the two armies met. At Badr, here, the important term is Jam'ani, the two armies, the two sides, the two hosts, depending on which translation you read. If you look in the other attestation of Jam'ani, in this sense, in the Quran, is in Surah 26:61. And this whole section of Surah 26 concerns the Exodus, and especially the bathing accident of the Pharaoh's army in the Red Sea. You know, Sharm el-Sheikh apparently can be a dangerous place. The whole thing there is there. The word, the root faraka, can sometimes mean to divide. What it does here, day of discrimination, day of criterion, that is the basic Arabic meaning of it, as we find in Al-Baqarah 50. And recall when we parted the sea for you, then we saved and drowned the people of Pharaoh while you were looking on. Farakna, we parted the sea for you. So it does mean that. But the point is, which criterion, what was actually decided at the Battle of Badr, except that they successfully raided a caravan of the Quraysh. I mean, this is not Berlin, May 45, what we're talking about here by any means. When we look at the two sides, and especially in Surah 26, it's clearly the Israelites and the Egyptians. We then look at the drowning of the army of Pharaoh in the Hebrew Bible. There we have Vayomer Moshe El Ha'am El Tiru Et Yeshua Hashem Asher Yaaseh Lachem. Fear ye not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, Yeshuat Hashem, Yeshuat Adonai, which we will show to you today. When we then go to the Aramaic translations, on the right of the screen, you see the Syriac, and on the left, it's Targum Onkelos. So the Targums are Jewish translations of the Hebrew Bible into Aramaic when the Jews had stopped speaking Hebrew. Syriac is just Eastern Aramaic, as I mentioned earlier. It became the liturgical language of the Oriental Church. It's basically a similar language, a dialect. As I mentioned last week, the Peshitta here is interesting because it was by Jews who probably translated by Jews who became Christians. So it's translated directly from the Hebrew. So in the previous, in Exodus 14:13, you find Yeshua. Some people might know this. This is Joshua. And he's somebody that readers of the New Testament might also be familiar with. And Hurkana is in the what we find in the Aramaic translations, both the Jewish and the Christian. It's the same word. And this is what we find up here, the same root as Yawm al-Furqani in Surah 8. When we look, for example, in a Syriac dictionary, here from Brockleman, which when we still wrote dictionaries in Latin, you see on the left-hand side, under meaning see, zal, salvavit, liberavit, etc. And then we see on the right, what is that? Peruca, Peruca, Salvator, Liberator, Perucia, Perucaia, Salvatorius, and then Farukna, Salvatio, and then Purcana, the word we just had. So it's at the bottom right. Salvatio, so salvation in good English. So what we see here, what we've seen here briefly, is how in the Quran, they invent the Battle of Badr based on two separate Quranic verses. They seem to be talking about one of the most well-known encounters in the Hebrew Bible in the Old Testament, and they've adapted this to they've read the biography of Muhammad into this. What is interesting is that in the Sunni tradition, Umar ibn al-Khattab gets the nickname Farouk. So if we believe Azuri, as quoted by Tabari, we heard that the al-Kitab were the first to call him Umar al-Farouk. The Muslim used to pass this down from them. However, I have not heard that the Messenger of God ever mentioned anything of the sort. According to other traditions, Umar got it at the Battle of Badr. And according to other traditions, he seems to have gotten it al-Kitab, especially with the Jews. But as we see here, somebody saw it. Where is it here? It is the top right. Faruqa, the savior, the liberator. Of course, Farouk is good Aramaic, but you also find in the Arabic text, they say he was actually called Farik, which would be Arabic. But there is no unanimity because, of course, the Shiites say it was Muhammad gave the title to Ali, and we also find texts where it's used for Muhammad. So we see a form of the relics of messianism in the Islamic tradition as well. So when we go back to Surat Al-Anfal 841, the day of the criterion, the Anzala ala Abdina Yawm al-Furqani, what we've sent down to on the day, and here we see in this translation, our slave, it's all of a sudden become Muhammad. They've added it in the text. Of course, translators can be very creative when they need to be. This, of course, we have this elsewhere, for example, in the Hebrew Bible, literally in Isaiah 49:8, we have second line in red, Uveyom Yeshua, and in the day of salvation, I will help you, etc. Underneath, we have it in the Peshitta again, in the Syriac, and there it's translated with Yauma de Kana, the same thing. So it's clearly it's not a criterion in Arabic here in this sense, in the verses we've discussed, or decision, because what was decided. They're talking about the day of salvation, and they're talking about the most salvific soteriological moment of the Israelites in the Old Testament, or especially during the Exodus. So we can get rid of this Muhammad. This Abd is clearly Moses, and it's not the day of the criterion, but it's the day of salvation would be the good. And I should have crossed out Muhammad there, but I forgot. When we look up a bit previously in Al-Anfal 29, believers, if you remain mindful of God, he will give you a criterion to tell right from wrong, Furqanan, and wipe out your bad deeds and forgive you. God's favor is great indeed. So he will give you salvation, would be a best translation. In 25:1, there we see, blessed is he who sent down the criterion, al-Furqan, to his servant, that he may be to the worlds a warner, a nadhir. And of course, in Islamic exegesis, this is one of the jobs, titles of Muhammad. In Surah 38, 65 to 70, tell them, O Prophet, I am nothing but a mundhirun, which is seen as a synonym. 65. There is no deity but Allah, the One, the Supreme, the Lord of the heavens and the earth, etc., etc. Tell them I had no knowledge of the High Council when they were disputing. I am told only matters by means of revelation only, because I am a clear warner, a nadhirun mubin. In Surah Al-Baqarah, Surah 2, we find the warner again. Indeed, we sent you with the truth, bil haqi, as a bearer of good tidings, bashiran, and as a warner, nadhiran, and you will not be answerable about the people of the blazing flame. Good. So we keep haqi. Haq is clearly true. But let's first of all look at the word bashir. If we look at the dictionary of there, and you can see it on the right, it is to rejoice, to be delighted, to be happy, to announce this good news, to bring news of the good, da-da-da. Bishar, joy, butcher, glad tidings. Then Bashir, glad tidings. Herald, harbinger, forerunner, precursor, evangelist. Bishara, annunciation, prophecy, gospel, good omens. And then we have the Ait al-Bishara, the Annunciation, the Feast of Our Lady. And Tabshir, announcement, preaching of the gospel, evangelization, missionary activity. Tabshari, a missionary. And on the right, Mubashir, announcer, messenger of glad tidings. An evangelist, a preacher, a missionary. So if you look at Bashara in Arabic, it's quite a loaded Christian term.
Mm-hmm.
So here we can then translate, indeed, we sent you with the truth as a preacher, evangelist, a bashiran, and as a warner, but then we just have to do the warner. And when you look at the Quran, nadhir is often used together with haq and bashir. It's kind of a refrain in the Quran. We look at nadhir in a dictionary. This is again the dictionary fonts there.
Excuse me, Professor. Yes. Before we get ahead too far, is it okay if I ask a couple of questions? Yes, before we have too much content. Just briefly, so you showed before that in Surah 8, verse 41, 47, whatever it was, that there are these verses that they have now been for 1400 years, or more like 1200. They have been saying, this is Muhammad, this is the Battle of Badr, trust me, bro, this is Muhammad. But you are saying it is not Muhammad. When it was first written, it was telling the story of Moses. Muhammad has never been in the verse. People have told us that this is describing Muhammad and Badr, but that was not what the verse meant when it was first written. Is that what you were saying about this verse?
Yes. I apologize if I was unclear. That is basically, so my point is, when you read, let's take a different one second. Let's go to the Pictile.
The Encyclopedia of Islam says that Nadir is also used of Noah as the warner before the flood.
Well, he wasn't. Yes, well, that would make sense, but we'll get to that in a second. Let's stick to this. We'll use Pictile's translation first, because he translates basically what's there, more or less. And no, if ye believe in Allah and that which we revealed on our slave Abdina on the day of on the Yawm al-Furqan, the day when the two armies met. That's all we have there. That's all we have there. There is no reference to Badr here. There is no reference to a battle here, strictly speaking. And what is the day of discrimination? So, as I mentioned, they this is usually joined together with Al-Imran 123. So Allah is not, in this translation, is the victory at Badr. Well, there you see how, if you know what the verse is supposed to mean, it says, Allah has helped you, Natsara, at you, plural, helped ye, in Badr, but when you were contemptible. So, but what Badr here is, here we don't have any mention of a battle or what happened here, just that you were contemptible. So observe your duty to Allah in order that ye may be thankful. Good, fair enough. But the question is, where do we get the Battle of Badr from then?
Right. So all of those things are basically, they told us a story later, and they said these verses here, they're talking about that story, even though the Quran never intended original to say that. Still on these verses, so you showed Surah 8, 40 something. Just a bit earlier, as well in Surah 8, is verse 17, is the verse that says, you did not unalive them, but Allah unalived them. I'm just using the language for, the internet. And you did not throw when you threw, but Allah threw. And they exegete that they have said that 8:17 is the verse that in the story of Badr, they say Muhammad threw a rock, and then that rock made the winds just blow into the faces of the enemy. So, but if this
yeah, good, that's nice. I know the verse. So it's clear what's going on here, but again, what is the problem? There is a problem here.
Before you go further, can I just show something? This is the Encyclopedia of the Quran. It's page 960. Just so this is the Brill Encyclopedia of the Quran. Just something curious I was just going to throw in there. They reference here that Muhammad, like all prophets, is both a warner, the nadhir, and a bearer of good news, bashir. And they mention the verses, but the Quran itself has a dual function. It is not only a bearer of good news, but is good news. So according to at least these scholars who've written this, so the Quran actually is the good news. So it is trying to usurp the Gospels, trying to be the Gospels. So there might be an element of could the Battle of Badr have been Christ's victory over death, for instance, or could it have been modeled on a different...
I think here where the key point is here is Al-Jam'ani, the two armies, the two sides, when they met. And as I pointed out later, when you look at the only other time Jam'ani is used in this sense in the Quran is in Surah 26, and this whole section discusses the army of Pharaoh and what have you. So I think we have to stick with this, but of course, this makes perfect sense here because, as it says in Exodus 14, this was the salvation of the Lord, the Yeshuat Adonai, the Yeshuat Hashem, which makes perfect sense. So it's clearly, and which is translated in both Jewish and Christian Aramaic as purkana, which is the same word as we've seen, and as we've seen in Isaiah 49:8, the Beyom Yeshua. So this is, I think we just have to stick with the Exodus. If somebody wants to take it on a different path, they may, but this is my proposition. My only point here is it's clearly, when you take everything together, a reference to the drowning of the army of Pharaoh at the Red Sea, which was the major soteriological event of the people of the Israelites during, especially during the Exodus, but probably in the entire Hebrew Bible. Do you have any more questions, or?
Well, I will just say, so is it fair to say that seeing as we have a verse that originally was telling the story of Moses, and then Islamic scholars have told us, no, this is Muhammad, and they've created stories to boot. Is it fair to assume or conclude that the same will happen in lots of other places in the Quran, and we read verses now explained to be about Muhammad, but actually it was describing Moses all along?
Yeah, exactly. I would concur. Well, or other biblical events. So it's clear, for example, if you look at the book by Gabriel Syed Reynolds, he does a commentary of the Quran based on the Bible, and if you read his commentary there, you find all kinds of biblical and other references. And I think it's quite clear that the Quran started out life as some type of a Christian work, and it was only later Islamified and expanded. And if you read, for those who read German, where do I have it here? There's an excellent book by Pullman, Entstehung des Korans, where he discusses. So he was Pullman, the late Carl Friedrich Pullman, was a Old Testament scholar who did especially Ezekiel and the major prophets, and did some excellent commentaries on them. And in his retirement, he decided to apply the text critical method to the Quran, and he came up with some very surprising results. And basically, he's proposed several redactional stages, and in the latter stages only was the Quran quasi-Islamified. So it's clearly but it's also when the Quran says Hadha al-Kitab, this is the book, or that is the book, actually. It's usually translated as this is the book, but literally it's that book.
Yeah.
So it cannot be the Quran, the Kitab, and when it refers to Quran, well, Quran is of course also an Aramaic loanword, and from Karyana, and that's not recent knowledge. That goes all the way back to at least the second edition of the Geschichte des Korans from Mildeke, as updated over 100 years ago by Schwali. And so we have another thing. So I would agree with you, JC, that so it's clearly that the Quran is not originally an Islamic book. I'd go as far to say it's probably a pre-Islamic book by a long shot. And the exegesis was later, and I think I often have the suspicion when you read the Mufassirun, the exegetes, they're more interested in the so-called asbab an-nuzul, the circumstances of revelation, than in what the verse actually means. Okay, this happened when Muhammad was doing this, or what have you. They're more interested in that, and it's clearly here that the Battle of Badr has been. They've taken parts of Surah 8 and also other surahs, and they've sort of made a bit of a exegetical cocktail, shaken not stirred, and come up with a new interpretation. But So if you look at the Arabic text alone, it's clear that we have a reference here to the drowning of the army of Pharaoh in the Red Sea. With the so the vocabulary is here on the word level is important.
Okay.
And
Robert, what will be your Robert? What will be your take on the word Badr? Bibadrin in Badr. I know that Bruno Bonnet-Aimard has a theory on the word, but what would be its original meaning?
I don't have a proposition right now on that. It could be the full moon or something.
Okay. And do you know of Bruno Bonnet-Aimard's theory?
I've probably, it's in his commentary, isn't it? No, his commentary didn't get that.
Translation. You know how he did a translation.
I know, I have his commentary, yeah.
Only I think it's only the 5 first surahs. And if I remember well, I think for him, Badr would have something to do with Mary, the Virgin Mary. Well, you know how he is.
Yeah. I've had a lot of profit from him. He is very original, and sometimes I agree with him, sometimes I don't. And with this Masjid al-Haram, as I showed you my article, there I agree with him.
But the thing with the word Badr, it's an hapax. It occurs only once in the Quran, so it could mean anything.
It could mean anything.
That the Mufassirun wanted it to mean.
Yeah.
If I could chip in. Hi guys.
Yes, my apologies.
Yeah, there was this person, this mystery writer who goes under the name of Christoph Luxemburg. He wrote he wrote an article. You guys know who he is, but to me, he's this shadowy figure. But he wrote an article called "No Battle of Badr," and he had a theory about it, which to my untrained mind, I'm no linguist, but it seemed plausible what he said. It said, what is it? It comes from the Aramaic word edra, meaning auxiliary. And so he said it's the Allah certainly helped you at Badr, meant at the auxiliaries, as a military term, and essentially links it with the idea that 3,000 angels came down to assist the believers in the battle, and that's why they might have called it the Battle of the Auxiliaries. That was his
What's
take.
the root? What's the root he used? What does he? How does he?
It transliterates as EDR and Aleph, and there's some guttural symbol that I wouldn't even attempt to pronounce to begin with. So Edra would be his word, and the B is what means by or some.
Yeah, one could, but
preposition.
Yeah, I would beg to disagree there. Let's just leave it at that. Phonetically, there is a bit of a problem there. I don't think that. But the point, my big argument, or not my argument here, my only point was here was to discuss the Yawm al-Furqana, because that is relevant, and not to because as Odon has pointed out, Badr is a hapax legomenon, and so it's a word that only appears in the Quran one time, and we don't even know how it's supposed to be pointed necessarily. So my primary interest here was Furqan and not Badr, but let us just say that it's clear that there is no Battle of Badr, and as I said, it's been associated with passages that clearly refer to the drowning of the army of Pharaoh. So,
if I can interrupt for just a moment,
of course.
I just need to acknowledge. Or says, "Thank you again for that donation." It says, "Makes sense. The original feels, if you ditch the standard Islamic narrative as a Judeo-Christian text, then it was still collected and edited by people that were interested in using it as a unifying tool and so on. So thank you. And then
Well,
also,
I think part of the problem is, so if you look at the first, a lot of the classical exegetes, just like the classical hadith collectors, they were all Persians, and the first grammarians of classical Arabic were Persians. And the reason for concocting classical Arabic grammar was, of course, to make sense of the Quran. But of course, when you have Persians, they have Arabic as the second, at least their second language. And secondly, as I pointed out last week, Arabic and Aramaic are related languages. They're both Semitic languages. They're certainly not the same language. It's a bit, I don't know, like, well, you're in Poland, I don't know, Polish and Ukrainian or something.
oh yeah, they're very similar, but there's like certain words, like between Slovenian, for instance, like szukać in Polish, it's to search. In fact, it's interesting, in Afrikaans, it's soek. So it's szukać, szukać coś. I'm looking for something, but the same word szukać in Slovenian is a false friend, and it means to have sex with, in the vulgar sense. So
false, as the British say.
Yeah.
But Odon, the Frenchman, is of course enjoying himself. Yes. But so you have these false friends. But what I mean, so it's clear here that faraka means, so if you look in Semitic languages, all things that start with a P or an F and an R is the first two root consonants. They have something to do with separate, discern. And this is, of course, where the semantics of salvation came from in Aramaic, because, it's like with the Titanic. If everybody gets off the Titanic alive, then nobody's saved. So some people get saved, and some people hang out at the hotel bar and drink the last bottle of champagne while the boat is going down. So what I mean is, discerning separation is, of course, salvation. You could think of Mark, the beginning of the Gospel of Mark, where the sheep are separated or something. So it's clear, the semantics are clear, and how Aramaic developed it, but the point is this specific meaning only developed in Aramaic. But of course, if you're a Persian and you're having an unvocalized, unpointed text, and you're trying to impart sense to it. So first of all, you're Persian, so you probably don't know the Bible all that well, and you don't know Aramaic. So you steamroll through it. So as with Slavic languages, or with, so you don't see it. For example, you see this, for example, in English with nautical vocabulary, it's all borrowed from Dutch, who are the seafarers before the English. So things like mast and mate and deck, they're all Dutch words, but they've become so part of English that people don't realize they are loan words. And if you look at English, there's even Old Norse words from the Viking days. The famous English word bylaw, which by in Danish is still a village, so it's a village law, local law. But nobody would imagine that bylaw is actually a Viking loan word in English.
Interesting. All right. Yeah. Also, before we go further, I just want to say, Art Butler, thank you. He says he appreciates, and I would say, our dissecting of evil. Safe day, gentlemen. Thank you very much. And I want to throw something out there, if I may, and then I'll hand it back to you. Just that I've had Paul and Odon and JC on, and we present ideas here and we discuss them. This is one of the things we do here. We present ideas, and JC is an author, we've discussed on the channel how stories get constructed, how ideas are taken, how things get muddled, how things are deliberately changed, how things are learned in a confused manner, but how a story is constructed as an author. So we've been working forward and backward on the construction of the Quran. We were talking earlier about the Burak, right? So I did a lot of work on the Burak in the past, So I'm not going to go into all the context besides, I mean, the fact that you've got the whole Burak idea is also taken almost directly from the At-Tawiraf, right? So you've got this whole thing of At-Tawiraf, the horse-like creature, and so on. And I'm going to skip all of that, so we'll miss a lot of context. But because obviously it's a mishmash.
Well, you know, because there is even
Yep.
there is even if one goes back far enough, and if I remember, it's been proposed by somebody that they so if you take Pegasus in Greek as a Hittite loanword, that's another Indo-European language that's spoken in the Bronze Age in Anatolia, then you come up with something that also resembles lightning, but that seems a bit far-fetched.
Yeah,
But,
I know. I don't
Barak,
want to stretch the analogy too far, but it just seems that the ideas, there seem to be so many ideas borrowed from different sources, and this, as I said, without context, just that the idea of Barak, Burak, lightning flash, right? Sabaean Barak, Palmyrene Barak. So this is a well-known term, but if you go into the Hebrew side of it, Barak was the son of Abinoam of Kadesh, and then they speak of Deborah, right? And what happens is there's a fight, there's a battle, and Deborah leads the men or something in the battle.
Yeah.
And what happens is, so under the heavy rainfall, the alluvial plain becomes a morass in which the heavy armed troops found it impossible to move, right? And then because everyone got stuck, and this also reminds me, they dug the trenches at the Battle of Badr in the sand, fine and well. But here you've got the chariots, the horses got stuck in the mud. And in the Battle of Badr, the horses get stuck in the trenches. So I thought there seemed to me there may be a borrowing here where they take the concept and they apply this idea and they mix and match ideas until they come up with a story that seems to, it's familiar enough because it's based on familiar concepts, familiar imagery. But I just thought this was an odd idea here that you've got this battle, and this was something I was pursuing at one point just as an idea. I mean, again, I'm not invested in it, but it's just that one finds these ideas that are mixed and matched, and it might have been a template they used as part of this idea for the battle.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, with Judges 5:12,
Yeah,
go
13
on,
to 18.
Deborah, sing a song, and then you have Barak mentioned, and catch those who catch you, you son of Abinoam, and well, what I mean is it's of course a literary motive, you know, and they're why wouldn't they have borrowed something the Book of Judges? I've got nothing against it. And winged horses, as you see, you have them in Assyria. It's nothing new, and it's part of Mesopotamian iconography. So that, but you had something, and it's, so this goes back to the Assyrians, you know, and it was borrowed later by the Persians and what have you. So, yeah, I have no problem with that. It's
All right, thank you.
quite clever. But you had something there about Sabaic from.
Oh, let me go back. Here.
Sabaic, Barka. So I know the root BRQ in Sabaic is meaning the rain period, the monsoon. But I'm not familiar with that, but that doesn't necessarily.
So yeah, with Sabaean Barkak, if it's rain season, monsoon, then we're talking about heavy rainfall and a morass in which the enemy is trapped. And just that these concepts just seem...
Barkas is, of course, the family name of Hannibal and his family. And this is where we still get, because the Punic part of Spain was Catalonia, and we still find Barcas in the name of Barcelona.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, and the whole story of the Burak is, if you read through the tafsirs or the different legends, it is all over the place. I mean, in one popular one, of course, there's so many different variations of how Muhammad goes up to paradise, but in one, the Burak is very stubborn. Sorry?
Pardon? Go ahead.
In one version of the story, the Burak is extremely stubborn, and the angel Gibberish has to punch the Burak in the face to make it submit and have Muhammad get on the horse. So there's so many different. I mean, but that's one of the funnier ones. But yeah, it's just also tied in with lots of pre-Islamic, or no, it's also tied in with lots of old Hebrew mythology as well. So it's, you just find these little strands that overlap.
Well, of course, but of course, the Isra and the Miraj, they used to be, of course, two independent stories, and where they only really came together was during the period in the Crusades when they had to tie Mecca with Jerusalem, with Fasail literature, and they needed, Saladin needed an excuse to claim Jerusalem.
Right.
So it's only late that the Isra and the Miraj become one story, that who takes Burak Airways from non-stop night flight on Burak Airways from Mecca to Jerusalem, and then he goes up to heaven. Well, the stories are only joined much later.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to unpack there, because there just seem to be ideas taken from all over the place and assembled. They're familiar motifs, so they have some kind of credibility. But
there's another element, I think, here, Lloyd and Robert. This Burak story, it was not invented out of the blue. What's the purpose? What's the purpose of such a story? You said it, Robert. It is to sort of legitimize Jerusalem as being a holy city within Islam. But as we already saw, Jerusalem was the first goal of early Islam. Early Islam was not about Mecca and so on. It was all about Jerusalem. We talked about it here many times. So there must have been a sort of remnants of memory in the collective mind of Muslims, remnants of a memory of Jerusalem. And I think inventing, you see, is very, very complicated to erase a story.
Right.
The best way to neutralize a story that could endanger,
repurpose it.
Yeah, it's to modify it.
Yeah, give it a new meaning. Robert's
you give it a new meaning. So the collective memory of Jerusalem was transformed into this Isra and Miraj story. And besides, it was much more than this. In early Islam, the Arab leaders pretended to be the Messiah or something equivalent to the Messiah. Like we saw with Robert, they bore titles like Al-Faruq, which is a messianic title. And in the Shia tradition, Ali is even said to have pretended to be Jesus. Jesus is the character that ascends to the heavens, that goes from the heavens to earth and from earth to the heavens.
Well, so Amir Muizzi has written on this, on Ali as basically a calque of Jesus. So
yeah, right.
So there must have been a memory also of a messianic figure from the early days, the early stage of Islam, ascending to heaven. So you see how the Isra and Miraj story is convenient.
And they just borrow and adapt it. If I can add to what you say, Paul, just 1 second.
Okay.
Just 1 second. Odon very beautifully said that these stories were entrenched in the culture. They were well remembered, and so they had to repurpose them and change the meaning, and hopefully that people will forget and the new generation learns. One of the purposes it seems that the Muslims applied to the story of the Burak is that Hagar had to walk 1,200 kilometers in a straight line from Beersheba, or wherever she started from, to Mecca, right? So that's part of the problem. Whereas if you look at the story, Hebron and Beersheba, which are the places associated with Abraham, those are 43 kilometers or 27 miles and 70 kilometers apart, which is a lot more realistic. So they had to somehow say, look, how did you get there, and how did Abraham go there for day trips? So you find that there's the whole thing about Abraham going there for little day trips, and this is one of the ways that they explain that little problem. Back to you, Paul.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, the on Odin's idea of this resurgent hidden memory is almost pushed out into the subconscious, but it seems to me that there's almost something Freudian in this, that there are only two places in the Quran where the Masjid al-Haram, which we all agree is Jerusalem, there are only two places in the Quran where it's compared or contrasted to somewhere else. One is the changing of the Qibla, where it's changed from one place to the Masjid al-Haram, and the other is the night journey, where you go from the Masjid al-Haram to the Masjid al-Aqsa, and in both instances the other place turns out to be Jerusalem. They can't, where are we going to contrast the Masjid al-Haram to, that we all know is actually Jerusalem, and we're contrasting to somewhere else? Oh, well, the somewhere else has to be Jerusalem. It's rather like somebody asking me, where have I been? And I say, oh, I haven't been down the pub. It's that sort of, they can't help themselves. The story, the truth comes out through wanting to contrast and deny it. But there's a very practical reason why of course they had to have the night journey, and that was they needed some explanation for the Dome of the Rock and the buildings of the Umayyads, who knew full well where the Masjid al-Haram was, because they built this great domed shrine around it, and there's no doubt where the Umayyads thought.
That's also why they had to destroy the Kathisma church, because clearly it was a model of the Kathisma.
Well, somebody has to find a reason for this building. The building demands an explanation, and that was the best they could do.
What is interesting is that, if you look in the Islamic tradition account of this, because so when you ask yourself how many bona fide documents do we have from the Umayyad period? Not a lot, or basically hardly anything. So most of the stuff is, of course, written during the Abbasid period, saying, putting words into the mouths of the Umayyads. And of course, for obvious reasons, the Abbasids had to justify their coup d'etat. And so one of the criticisms, and we find the story of Ibn al-Zubayr occupying Mecca and what have you, which is, when you look in the Islamic tradition, it's also all over the map. But one of the criticisms levied against Abdul Malik is, of course, that he builds this Dome of the Rock, which is, by all accounts, a magnificent building. One can't deny that. But the idea is he's diverting, one of the criticisms was he was diverting the pilgrimage from Mecca to Jerusalem. And then, of course, if you come up with a story that, unfortunately, Mecca was a bit out of reach, you couldn't go there because the bad guys had occupied it. But you have another story. So I think, of course, in the Umayyad period, they hadn't heard of Mecca, and this is why Abdul Malik or whoever builds the Dome of the Rock. Because if you look at the reports, already in the mid 7th century, there's something going on in Jerusalem where the Arabs have some type of wooden structure, which is cool. But it is a bit, especially in late Latin, it's a bit like in French, une église is always a Catholic church and a temple is a Protestant church.
Right. Can I just mention something? Please continue, Robert. Please continue, Professor.
No. That's all I want. So it's clearly that the Dome of the Rock shows that there's a problem with Mecca.
Mm-hmm. I did a series on the Kathisma Church. This is a 4th century church which was deliberately buried. It was taken down and buried, and it would seem deliberately. It just disappeared for centuries and was found only a couple of decades ago when they were constructing a road, and they happened to find this. And it's halfway between Bethlehem and Jerusalem.
And it was for the Assumption of Mary.
Correct. And it looks clearly to be the model for the Dome of the Rock. It's almost identical in many ways. And you see here, this is a church in Jerusalem with a very similar construction. There are other examples of this style as well, like a Byzantine style. But and also the idea, the Kathisma, the seat of the Theotokos, where she stops on the way to Jerusalem with baby Jesus, and she's hungry, she's thirsty. There she sits on a rock, the seat, and then a stream is made to flow to give her water, and there's a palm tree that gives her shade, and I believe the tree bends down to give her shade and to give her dates. Maybe there were Adra dates.
What the interesting thing about this story, you have that in the Proto-Evangelium of James and the Gospel of Peter, which is in Arabic. But what is interesting is the root of this story, and here we're certainly not in. So if we have these apocryphal, the Proto-Gospel of James, the Gospel of Peter, we're certainly in Syria, not in Yemen. First of all, and second of all, this story is old, because if you look at Theognis of Megara and Xenophon and the Greek tradition, this is the story of the birth of Apollo. And if you look at early representations of Christ, he is depicted without a beard and looking a lot like Apollo.
Okay. So to me, just that they've taken from an apocryphal source or a Gnostic source, they've taken ideas, which we find other such ideas in the Quran as well, taken from similar sources. So it's just that they're blending here fact and fiction, and also the church.
1 second, Lloyd, I have it here.
One last item. I just want to mention, this church was at one point became a place where more than one faith worshipped. Let me try and find it. More than one faith worshipped there. And in fact, it acted as, they even had a prayer niche, a mosque prayer niche in the, here. They even had a mosque prayer niche in the church. So it seems it was a multi-faith site, and then they even had this, which is a very Islamic symbol found in the Quran as well. That's a story there to do with the date palm. So this was a multi-faith place where they had like one faith, one monotheistic idea until they split. But it even had a Muslim mihrab in the church at one point. So
this is an interesting point, because you have mihrab once in the Quran, and it's clearly a reference to the temple in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Because this is where Mary is. This is where Mary is living, what we also find in the Proto-Evangelium, where Lucas and Anna give Mary to the temple, to Zechariah. And so the one reference to the mihrab in the Quran is to the Holy of Holies, basically, in the temple in Jerusalem.
Right.
But just before I forget here, I just have my Greek here in front of me. I just happen to have it on the desk. But if you look at Callimachus, hymn 4 to Delos, so the birth of Apollo. So didst thou speak, and she gladly ceased from her grievous wandering, and sat by the stream of Inopus, which the earth sends forth in deepest flood at the season when the Nile comes down in full torrent from the Ethiopian steep. And she loosed her girdle and leaned back her shoulders against the trunk of a date tree, oppressed by the grievous distress, and the sweat poured over her flesh like rain, and she spake in her weakness, Why, child, dost thou weigh down thy mother? There, dear child, is thine island floating in the sea. Be born, my child, etc. And gently.
It's the same story, basically. That's incredible.
and this is just Kalimachos, but there's other versions. Sorry, I don't have my entire Greek library.
I think the Buddha was also born under a tree, wasn't he? He was,
the Bodhi tree.
Yeah, but so I have my colleague in Inârah, Marcus Groth. He's an expert also in Buddhism, and he knows the languages, and he's working on that as we speak. It should be a book in the monograph series of Inârah sometime soon. But the problem is this Buddha story is all over the map, and that is also probably the product of intertextuality, because there is a book, I have it in French here, but it's translated from English, so it's by Patrick Olivelle, Ashoka, Roi Philosophe. I just finished the French version. In English, it's Ashoka, Portrait of a Philosopher King.
I'm gonna put you back. There we go.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I thought you were gonna hold up the book. There we go.
Yeah, here it is. Yeah.
okay.
It's in English. Just note the author and Ashoka. But what is interesting here, he makes a very good distinction. First of all, how much do we know about early Buddhism? And then he makes the point that, with somebody even like Ashoka, we have Ashoka of the Buddhist tradition, we have Ashoka of the Chinese Buddhist tradition, we have Ashoka of the Brahman tradition, and we have Ashoka of the inscriptions, and they're 4 different people. And I think we should go this way with Muhammad too. But the book is worth reading. But the problem is with how old these, and I'm really out of my depth here. I'm not just swimming without a life jacket, I'm drowning when it comes to Buddhism. There you need Marcus Gross. But what I've understood is that these texts about his birth and what have you, they're all later. And of course, we know, if you look at the first inscriptions of Ashoka, which are the first mention of Buddhism, they're written in Greek and Aramaic, as well as in Prakrit, an Indian language. So how much intertextuality is involved? Because of course, in Afghanistan, in the good old days, they used to speak Greek and Aramaic.
Yeah.
So the point here is of course that here we see the Quranic birth narrative that's clearly a reference to the Greek tradition of the birth of Apollo.
This is a bit off the. So remember I spoke of the Al-Chasai, the book of Al-Chasai last week. I mentioned it briefly, and you had a giant angel giving a book to a guy who's the messenger, which very much seems like a precursor narrative that was borrowed, and it's heavily taken from Jewish apocrypha, and then it's applied to Islam somehow. But Mani, there's a link to Mani. There's a direct link from them to Mani and Mani to Islam. And then also the Book of Giants, the Middle Persian version. So then this is listed as the immediate predecessor of Mani in the sequence of prophets after Seth, Zoroaster, and the Buddha. So there's a sort of I don't have all the details, but I've covered it to a small degree in some of the work that I've presented. The ideas spread geographically and they persist through time, but you can see there's a thread that binds them. They're not completely random new ideas that just popped up out of nowhere, out of a vacuum. They come from one place, they migrate, they die out here, but they resurrect here because they've been maintained somehow, and then it goes on. So the idea moves. And there's a link to the Buddha as well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and of course with Manichaeism, we're in Mesopotamia, and not in Yemen or anywhere else, or Ethiopia. And we have to distinguish with that between the Western version, i.e., what St. Augustine recounts, and what we find in Mesopotamia. They seem to be 2 different things. But of course, because you have in the Quran the Khatam al-Nabiyin, which I think we discussed last week briefly, the seal of the prophets. And of course, Mani considered himself also the seal of the prophets. And as I and it's clearly originally a reference to St. John the Baptist, and it's a confirmation in this Khatam, because when you read Waqidi, his take on the young Muhammad, apparently Muhammad, before he's a prophet, when he's a young boy, he's telling his schoolmates, Ana al Khatam, I am the seal. Well, and in the Islamic tradition, it's seen as a physical mark between the shoulders, and not in the Greek sense as a confirmation.
Right.
But
And
this
then-
also applies to money, which is part of the logic. Yeah.
Yeah, and then also I think this is on Heterodoxies of the Shiites according to Ibn Hazm by Friedlander. The Jesus of the Manichaeans had no objective reality as a man, and this is the doctrine of the Docetist doctrine came to the Muslims through the medium of Manichaeism, which adopted this belief and gave it a definite shape. And so, yeah, there seems to be a link as well from Mani through to Islam, at least in this sense. So the Docetic idea, and there's so many versions of Jesus, not dying but being taken up into heaven, and Jesus not dying on the cross, and some of them can be traced to these various Gnostic groups and so on. So there's definitely ideas that are stolen, and some of them in the tafsirs are almost identical.
Oh yeah, and of course, because we're clearly in Mesopotamia, where where Islam originates, and we have all of these currents. Because remember, one of the things that the Sassanids did was they closed down the old Mesopotamian temples, and priests don't like being unemployed, so they became itinerant holy men largely. And the term is no longer actually valid, but we can just use it cautiously. This syncretism comes from, so you have in Mesopotamia all kinds of traditions bumping into each other and cross-pollinating and what have you.
Yeah, someone's asked me to just mention something by this one. I think JC asked me to show this. This is from T.W. Arnold and Samuel Zwemmer. This one, Islam was born in the desert with Arab Sabaeanism for its mother, Judaism for its father, and its foster nurse was Eastern Christianity. And of course, and then if you just briefly, if you look at the stories of the ascension, post-ascension, if you look at the way that the early Islamic scholars write about Paul, there's a riot of these stories from the 8th century onwards. But in some of them, Paul meets Nestor of the Nestorians. He meets the head of the Jacobite church, and he meets the head of there's 3 churches that they reference, 3 leaders who were friends of Paul at the time. He gives them 3 different versions of Christianity, and he sends them out into the world to cause as much confusion as possible. So apparently Paul was in the 4th and 5th and 6th centuries talking to people who came 400 years, 500 years after him. Well, what do you think of T.W. Arnold's statement here?
I think it basically it's one way of describing it. You can debate the details, but broadly speaking, it wouldn't be inaccurate. And go back, if you would please. But Zwemmer, Islam is not an invention but a concoction. And I would agree with that part. Certainly, Zwemmer was very astute scholar. Because going back to what I'm sure you've discussed it on your program previously, but that all of the major sites of Mecca are actually in Jerusalem. That Safa is Mount Scopus, and Marwa is Moria, and Baqa is the valley of Baqa, Gehenna in the Talmud. But there is an added interesting thing here that when you read even later with what's his name, Akbar al-Zaki, the Akbar Makkah, that you have this story that when apparently Hagar is running back and forth between Safa and Marwa looking for water, she's rescued by the local tribe who are called Keturah.
That's
But if you know that from Genesis that after Sarah dies, Abraham marries again.
that's his new wife, yeah.
And what the interesting thing is, if you put on Sepharia again there, Lloyd, and you go to Genesis, and I'll give you the verse here. Genesis.
So in some Shia sources, Jesus was born in Iraq, in Kufa, and Ali was pointing to a palm tree, saying, "Here Jesus was born."
If you go to Genesis 25, and just tip on verse 1 there. Go on verse 1 though. No, go up to verse 1.
My bad.
And you click on the number 1. Yeah, that's good. And then you go to commentary, and then go to Rashi, and it says Keturah. In Hebrew, it says Keturah hi Hagar. So what they do in the Jewish exegesis is they make Hagar, Keturah, into Hagar, and then they solve the problem of disowning Ismail, Ismail getting kicked out. And if you then go back, hit the arrow there on the top by commentary, go back again, and then if you go down to more at the bottom, voila, and you go to Targum, which is again, go to Onkelos. Oh, no, okay, that's not good. That's not it, right? Then go back again. Go down, go to Targum Jonathan. Yeah, voila. And Abraham added and took a wife, and her name was Keturah. She is Hagar, who had been bound to him from the beginning, and they make there's an etymology for that works in Hebrew. But the point is that this whole thing, you see, if you take all the pieces, you see basically all the building blocks out of which the Islamic narrative was constructed.
Interesting. JC, you've been very quiet for the last 3 weeks or so as we've been talking here. I'd like to...
No, I feel actually quite validated. So we've seen verses in the Quran that don't describe Muhammad. So this is things that we've been discussing before. And we've seen about the Burak. And I think we need to do a show just on the night journey, because I think it's one of the most fascinating topics and how they put that onto the text. So, but all of this is really fascinating. We can see how the Quran has very little to do with what was happening on the ground. Is pretty much the Quran was around, somebody put it together, but the stories were talking about other people, biblical people. They borrow from Targums and so on, and pseudo-gospels and all sorts of sources. But then later, by the time that we get to the Abbasids, people are trying to use that book to say, no, it's almost like they tried to put Muhammad wherever they could, and they created stories around it to make those verses be about Muhammad. And now we look at them and it's like, oh no, look, that's Moses right there. So,
no, but there, I don't know if I mentioned it last week, but there is a certain analogy with Homer and Muhammad. If I've mentioned it, shout and scream and tell me to be quiet. But so if you look at Homer, in the early Greek tradition, Homer was responsible for poetry, all kinds of poetry, the entire corpus of Greek poetry. And as time progressed into the archaic period, he was only responsible for the Odyssey and the Iliad. And these were recited, but apparently it's the same debate as in with the Quran, oral transmission and oral composition. But if you just read Homer, you see this is never composed orally. This is much too intricate. And at the end of, I think, the 6th century, they decided to, the Homeric epics would be the national tales of Greece, especially Athens, to be recited at the games. And then you need an author. When the rhapsodes recite something, they have to recite the same text. And the tyrant, basically, he doesn't canonize the text, but he establishes the text. And what you see then is into the 5th century, all of a sudden you see everybody knows who Homer is. There's temples being built, people name their sons Homer. You see a similar thing in the Islamic tradition after Muhammad gets established. And Homer was blind for the same reason that Muhammad was allegedly illiterate. Ummi, Nabi Ummi, which is basically a prophet to the Gentiles, of course, and not blind as the Lisan al-Arab claims. But Homer, okay, you can make a nice popular etymology in Greek with Omeros and blind, but the idea was he had to have been blind because his poetry was so great, it couldn't have been written by a human being, so he had to have been inspired by the muses. So he was inspired by the muses, and even if he would had wanted to, he couldn't have changed the text because he was blind. So of course the Greeks have this long debate on, was Homer born blind, or when he was young did he travel and only settle down when he became blind later in life? But the point being that if you have a work that you want to make authoritative or canonical, it needs to have an author, which is where we get author and auctor in Latin and auctoritas, author and authority, they're the same word. And for an author to have legitimacy, it needs a biography. So if you want to have a text that you make authoritative, at least, if not canonical or sacred, you need to have an author, you need to have somebody who's responsible and authority behind it. And for this, the authority to have legitimacy, you need a biography. And this is, I think, what basically happened with Muhammad, as it did with Homer. And of course, then you read Muhammad into the text and events of Muhammad's life into the text, as we saw with the Battle of Badr today. Because how this works, Lloyd, when you showed the example from the Encyclopedia of the Quran, they mentioned certain references to nadhir, but of course Muhammad, that refer to Muhammad, but of course Muhammad is only referred to 4 times in the Quran. So why does this have to be a reference to Muhammad? Of course, the point being, if you decide the nadhir, the warner, is Muhammad, then all references to nadhir are to Muhammad, and this is how the system perpetuates itself, let us say.
It asserts a meaning, it asserts something in the beginning, it redefines something, and then it just assumes it.
So is the bearer of good news Bashir, but as we've seen, Bashir is a Christian term in Arabic. The Muhammad, who like all prophets is both a warner. Yeah, but with all of these references, well, how do we read Muhammad into them? This is the exegetical tradition, of course. So if you decide...
Go on.
Pardon?
No, please go on.
No, I was finished.
Oh no, it's just I've read significant amounts of the Encyclopedia of Islam, the Brill Encyclopedia of Islam. I don't have the most recent version. I've got the previous one. And
the second edition is much better than the new one.
I think so, because I've noticed when looking online for some of the references but some of the meanings are watered down. Some of the descriptions are clearly, shall we say, a bit of a whitewash, where they leave out details. So I mean, there's a good combination of Muslim scholars and non-Muslim scholars, Western scholars, but still there seems to be a bit of a whitewashing going on, and you have to use these sources with care anyway.
Well, you have to use, so the point was, one of my teachers was Van Donzel, the editor-in-chief of the second edition. So maybe I'm a bit prejudiced, but good. This was the pre-critical phase, so some things are a little bit behind. But let's say the third edition started about a year after Van Donzel finished the second edition. And of course, let's say there was a certain agenda behind making the third edition, because they just spent 60 years writing the second edition. Why would you need a third edition right away?
Mm-hmm.
May I ask then, Professor, when the Quran then is talking to someone, or is saying that someone is a warner or a bringer of good news, who do you, and now they have told us that is certainly Muhammad. Do you have any idea, perhaps as a percentage, how many of those would have been the original guy, and which ones would be Moses?
I have a suggestion. If I could continue the PowerPoint quickly, I know we're running out of time, but I can probably, will let me just share the screen again. I suppose it's up to me to do that. Voila. Yeah, so we were, sorry to interrupt, JC, but since you mentioned it, and as a warner, we were there before we did more important things. So with nadhir, you look in an Arabic dictionary, it doesn't say, the initial meaning is not consecrate, not a warner, but consecrated to God, vowed, solemnly pledged, a warner, a herald, a harbinger, forerunner, and in modern Arabic, an alarm system, and what you have, and nadhir lil aktar is the air raid warning siren. Good. And then you have to the right, nadhir, one who has made a vow. And then mundhir, a warner, a cautioner. Well, you could say it's a loan word. So if you go to Jeffrey here, he has in some cases in the bottom, in the sense of vow, it is a borrowing from the Judeo-Christian circle, CF Hebrew, nether, nadhar in Phoenician, nadra in Syriac, etc., which is a doublet of nazar, to dedicate, concentrate, CF nazaru, a curse, which is just the inverse. So when you look at it in Arabic, nadhir, this is from Lane's dictionary, you have one who warns, the apostles, the Prophet Muhammad, so according to most of the expositors, and what have you. But when you look here, this is from a French dictionary, consacrer quelque chose à Dieu, to consecrate something or someone to Dieu, to God, faire vœu de, to make an oath. Third meaning, consacrer son fils au sacerdoce, au ministère de la religion. So when you consecrate one of your children to become a
priest.
A priest. Thank you, Odon. Merci. And you see this on the right, it goes into more detail. You also see the feminine, according to Lane, nadhira, a votive gift, that which one gives when one makes a vow. We discussed that last week briefly with with the Phoenician, and nadhar, nether in Hebrew, a child appointed by the father and mother to be a minister or servant of the church, or to a place appropriated to religious service. So we see another Christian term. We see, this is of course in modern Hebrew, nazir, which is a monk, a hermit, a friar, an oblate.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Christian term. When we see here in Semitic languages, underneath we see the va, which we have in Old South Arabian, Old North Arabian, Modern South Arabian, and Arabic. But when you look to the right, you see it's become a zain, a zed in Hebrew and Aramaic largely. Of course, this is the Nazarite, which we find in number 6, 1 to 21. Someone who abstains completely from alcoholic drinks such as wine and beer, as well as from grapes, raisins, vinegar, not to approach any corpse, not to cut anyone's hair or beard. The vow was usually taken for a fixed period according to Jewish tradition. This typically ranged from 30 to 100 days. However, there were also Nazarites for life who had been chosen by the Lord for this way of life before their birth. The best known among the latter were Samson, the prophet Samuel, and in the New Testament, John the Baptist. You could say, of course, Jesus was not a Nazarite. He was from Nazareth. And but you have here, so we saw in the Quran previously, Haki, we were sent, Nazala, Anzala, with truth, Haki, the good news, and as a Nazir. So one could, to answer JC's question briefly, John the Baptist on the right, you've sent John and he has testified the truth. Kai me martureken te aletheia. And in Luke, and with many other words, John exhorted the people and proclaimed the good news. Evangelizeto ton laon, he evangelized. So we've got Bashir and we've got al-Haq. And then for Jesus, it's the same. In John 1:6, we have aletheia. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. So I am the way, the truth, and the life, and the truth. And Luke 4:18, pneuma curio ep eme, u iken echrisen me evangelith sithrai tokois, to proclaim good news to the poor, to evangelize. If you take it for Jesus, and we go back to the meaning here as the votive gift, a sacrifice, which is the votive gift, we have the Last Supper with Luke, where Jesus sacrificing himself, and 1 Corinthians 5:7, get rid of the old yeast so that you may be as a new unleavened batch as you really are, for Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Kai garto pascha emon e tuthe Christos. So we find this in Quran 25:1. Blessed is he sent down the salvation to his servant that he may be, is it a warner? Or is it a sacrifice? Because if you look at Quran 25:1, and we compare that, John 17:3, now this is the eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. Apestilas, and then John 3:17, for God did not send his son. So we've got the verb to send, as we saw when we started out here. We have sent you, anzala. So we have the verb to, where are we here? Apestilas here, into the world. This is in that he may be a warner to the worlds. Alamin. Aiston Kosmon. So we have the worlds, we have sending, and then we have Ephesians 5:2, and walk in the way of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. O Christos, agapesen umas kai paradoken eauton uper emon prosphoran kai thusianto theo, and of course Hebrews 10:10-14, and that by that will we have been made holy through the sacrifice of the body of Jesus Christ once and for all. And 14, everybody can read it for themselves, but by one sacrifice he is made perfect forever those who are being made holy. Miagar prosphora, tetelaioken aiston dienekes tus agiazuminos. So, blessed is he who sent down the criterion to his servant that he may be to the worlds a warner. You can say, praise be to him who sent down Nazala, the deliverance of Furqan, upon his servant, so that he might become a nadhir, nadhira, a sacrifice, lil alamina, aiston kosmon, to the world. Of course, the plural in Arabic, so alamin, alam here is an Aramaic loanword, because the root ein lam mim is where we get ilm for knowledge in Arabic, but alam is from meaning world or eternity, is from Aramaic, olam in Hebrew, of course. This is clearly a loan word, and you've got some semantic usage here. So you see this in Aramaic contracts from Elephantine when you sell so when I sell a house to Odon, he wants to make sure I don't have it back. So it used to be you sold it laolam or la alam, and but Odon wants to be really sure I'm not going to claim the house back. So he says la alam alamin, for the eternity of eternities. So Kerr, there's no way you're ever going to get that house. So if we do this again with Al-Baqarah 2:119, indeed we have sent you the truth as an evangelist and as a sacrifice. This makes more sense. Then the question is, what do we do with mundhir? Well, if we look at it in the Quran, it's usually in the plural. And of course, for example, on the right, Quran 4:163 to 165, of course, Muhammad is added. It's not in the text. It just says, we have revealed to you as we have revealed to Noah and the prophets after him. We've revealed to Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and Jesus, and Job, and Jonah, and Aaron, and Solomon. And we gave to David psalms. We revealed to the messengers we have already told you of. These messengers were sent as bearers of glad tidings, and as are they warners? Or here, are they the consecrated ones? Because before I formed you in the womb, I chose you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations, i.e., these are the people that are consecrated to be prophets. Well, that's not.
Can I interrupt for a moment? Would that be okay?
I'm finished.
While you were speaking, I did a bit of a look up.
I was trying to get finished before we hit the 2 hour mark. My apologies. I raced through it.
No, we're late. Yeah, I'll have to send you a bill or something. We'll have to.
No. My apologies.
I'll speak to Odon, but yeah, also don't want to keep you guys from missing the match. But
no, it only starts at midnight apparently.
Okay, so we can go for another 3 hours then. Great. Okay, so the Quran in context, texts and studies on the Quran by Angelica Neuwirth, Nicholas Sinai, and Michael Marks. You were talking about the Arabic word ayah is related to the Hebrew word oth, whatever, if I mispronounce, meaning in biblical and rabbinical usage, sign or miracle.
Yeah.
Right? Now skip forward, and they say in the Syriac translation of the Gospel according to John, they speak of the Syriac version of the word is ata, which is where it seems the word ayah comes from, and this refers to signs by which Jesus manifested himself as the Lord. So just at this time, I looked at a couple of different sources where I was looking up this word and the word nazala, and in fact, in this one, I didn't have time to go through this very deeply.
Well, what is interesting is that in modern Arabic, it means to download. So you could, if you wanted to, you could say that Muhammad downloaded the Quran from heaven.
Right, but they speak here of, this is the codex, this one is called the Codex of a Companion of the Prophet and the Quran of the Prophet, Musannaf Palimpsest by Behnam Sadeghi and someone else, and they speak here of this term is a candidate for assimilation of nearby phrases, and it says the proximity of this occurrence makes it easy to see how the addition of this could be a false memory harking back to earlier use. And I'm not sure, I just literally looked this up. Because I'm just searching through. I've got software that can go
But
through.
I would strongly recommend that for the Salah palimpsest you use the work of Elizabeth Pullen.
Yeah, it's not that. It's just that I've got software. I've got a huge library of thousands of documents, and I've got software that indexes all of these documents. It takes forever, but once it's built the database, I can find any word within under 2 seconds, basically.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm old-fashioned. I only know what I've read. So
yeah. So if you give me a word, I can cross-reference across tens of thousands of documents in a couple of seconds, and I can see where this is found and how it's used. So if let's say I'm looking up something, I'll download 50 documents on the topic, dump it in a folder, have it indexed, and then I can search through it very efficiently. And so this does seem to be more reference to, I mean, so they could, as you were saying, it does seem to reference Jesus.
I would say, so I would say my argument too, as I said, I raced through the presentation, but it's always interesting. Yeah, good. So with Aramaic, it depends, of course, which pronunciation you take. You know, there's the Eastern, the Western, the modern. It's all over the map with Aramaic. I never figured out. I always pronounced it incorrectly biblically, but upsetting everybody. But I upset everybody equally, ecumenically. But the point being that I would say that the idea that nadhir here means to warn, as we've seen from the dictionaries, it's not the primary meaning in Arabic. And it always comes together with truth, with sending, with truth, al-haq, and bashir, which is certainly a Christian term. And so the question is, where do the warning semantics come from? Of course, you know, warning is part of the prophetic job description. You know, when you go to the employment office and say you want to become a prophet, you know, then they'll ask you, can you warn? And you say, oh yeah, I'm a great warner as well. But the point being here, it's clearly here a reference to somebody that's consecrated or what you consecrate the sacrifice. So I suggest it could be either, I haven't quite figured this one out or decided. You can go either which way. It could be a reference to John the Baptist or to Jesus. So as I say, I'm not promoting any one religion here. I'm just saying it's what is meant in the Quran is certainly not a warner, and mundhir is not a synonym, because mundhirun, it's usually used in the plural in the Quran. These are those who've been elected, chosen, consecrated by God to become prophets.
That's like the Messiah.
Yeah, not a warner. And with the nadhir, as I said, I've got two good candidates. It's either John the Baptist or Jesus, who's been clearly referred to in the Quran, and not to Muhammad and not to a warner.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the context as you presented it is so clearly, let's say, biblical. I mean, I think it leans towards Jesus. I don't know. That was just my preference, but it clearly fits in the biblical context.
I would tend, if I had to put money on it, I would tend to the idea of nadhir as a sacrifice, i.e., Jesus is Jesus is in the New Testament as a sacrifice.
Right. There are two references in the Quran to the Nazirite rule of not drinking wine. Mm-hmm. You know the verse about the wine, yes. The wine and the maysir,
which is a Greek word or a Semitic word, yeah.
It's maysir. It's not maysir actually. That it's not about maysir but misera, which is a biblical term for everything related to grapes, which is not wine, like vinegar or other juices of grapes or so on. There are two verses that forbid wine and misera. And the Islamic tradition transformed the misera into maysir, and it gave him the meaning forcefully of gambling games. games of chance. But the thing here is that we have evidence in the Quran that they knew there was something about the Nazirite rule. And it could be related to the nadhir.
No,
Yeah, the witness, the Nazira, I looked it up, and that also seems to have a fascinating history attached to it.
If I could add, the Quran also talks about Hajjis shaving their heads when they complete the Hajj. Well, that doesn't really mean anything. You never find any great explanations as to what the significance of going to Mecca and shaving your head is except slavishly comply with what you're meant to do. But if you look for it, you'll find some symbolism, but it doesn't obviously mean anything. But if the Masjid al-Haram was Jerusalem, and if the believers had been prevented from making the pilgrimage to Jerusalem because whatever the Byzantines or the Sasanians or whatever stopping them doing that, and they have to fight to, which is what the Quran says in Surah 2 and Surah 22, that they've got to fight to expel those from where they expelled you. Then the Hajj becomes a military exercise. It's not a quiet retreat, it's a military exercise. And then you have to shave your head when you've completed it, because you've then got to the Jerusalem temple. And under the Nazarite oath, you can only shave your head at the Jerusalem temple. It's forbidden, once you've taken the oath, to shave your hair anywhere else. So you take the oath, you've got to fight to the end to make it real. So that's
Islam is structured as a military society, as a military organization. I mean, there's too much to go into here, but it definitely fits the military archetype. We should wrap up. It's been 2 hours.
But yeah, just to finish what Odon was saying. So if you look a couple of times in the Quran, you also have the kahin, which is in the exegesis is a soothsayer, but it's obviously related to Kohen in Hebrew, which is the priest of the temple, and if you look at what you have in Syriac, the kahin is the name for a father, a priest, a Catholic priest or an Orthodox priest. What do you want? But of course, they've turned this into a soothsayer, which so they have reinterpreted a lot of the vocabulary to.
They have. Let me just share something, man. It's so hard to finish, but we should. But I just want to make, you mentioned here. There's this whole thing about take me to the Sabi. That's in Da'if Bukhari. Everyone's familiar with Da'if Bukhari. And she says, take me, they said to Allah's messenger, she said, do you mean the man who is called the Sabi, the man with a new religion? Now, of course, you can ask whether it's a Sabaean or a Sabian, right? But I'll leave it at that. But they also mentioned here, they say that he's a poet or a kahin or magician. So they actually are using the word, the word here. And
but
so
you have it, for example, in Surah 52, 29. فَذَكِّرْ فَمَا أَنْتَ بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ بِكَهِينٍ. So, therefore, remember or be reminded that you are not, by the grace of your Lord, a soothsayer, and not a majnunin, a madman, but that's actually a monk. So, so the point is, it's somewhere else in the Quran. Where is that? 1 second.
While you're there, I just want to. I'm still working on that, so this is not done. But in 1856, the Russian scholar Wilson observed correctly that Ibn al-Nadim's Sabians of the swamps were Alchasites, right? And Muhammad is routinely called a Sabian, a Sabi, in the Hadiths. So it's just something I've been working on based on the Alchasite issue. And the Sabiyun, and this is from the Encyclopedia of the Quran, the Sabians, Sabiyun, should not be confused with the Sabaeans, the inhabitants of Yemen. So, yeah, it's just that there's some.
They're not.
Overlap.
These are clearly not the Sabaeans. These are clearly not the Sabaeans.
Yeah, but the
And as I
Sabians are
said,
people of the book. So there's just this weird confluence in history of Muhammad being this Sabian, which could well be an Alchicite, could well be one of these modern John the Baptist worshipping.
they're agnostic cult in Mesopotamia.
Yeah, the Mandaeans. Yeah, the Mandaeans.
Yeah,
So
but what I said earlier, that by going to Yemen, I mean, yeah, good. It's in Arabia. No, but Kahen is directly borrowed from Hebrew. Cohen, no, it's borrowed from Syriac. I would say the form, because you'd have to explain how you get from Cohen to Kahin. But I think it's from Syriac, and it's a technical term, and you see this especially in 69:42. Wala bi qawli kahinin, and don't take the word of a priest. But it's usually translated as don't take the word of a soothsayer. But, where do you get the soothsaying bit from? I mean, it's clearly, and it's related to the Semitic term where it's a priest, of which cult remains to be seen. But here, we've got something, a sort of a form of proto-Protestantism.
Yeah. It should be noted the Sabians, I mean, they worship John the Baptist basically, and then Muhammad is the Sabi, and you get all these odd, really crazy linkages, direct connections, and it's all linked. You can link it back to Muhammad. So it's just that, just these threads that are just hanging there, ready to be explored. We should end.
I concur.
We should end here. I mean, we'd love to have you back so we can explore more of this. I have tons of material I've collected where, using the software that I have that indexes, it's not AI, it just indexes things, and you can build connections between things. And you can reference thousands of documents and find common themes and terms. And it helps me to connect things and show what other scholars are doing. So yeah, you find odd things. We'd love to have you back. Would you be willing to do that and discuss some more? I think this was fascinating.
If Odin doesn't mind too much.
No, I allow it.
Okay, would you let me back out? And that's the question. We all know that's the question. Me, that's the question.
No, but I'd gladly come back. Let me know when and what you want to discuss, and then I can prepare a bit, and then I might not bore you too much.
No, I think we just run out of time. There's just so many questions to ask, and there's a lot to take in, and I think for the audience as well.
But what I think here is what should have been clear today is that this nadhir is a warner, and the mundhir all of a sudden is a warner. You'd have to. No, soothsayer makes perfect sense, but priest also makes perfect sense, and priest has etymology behind it, and you could say it's denigratory. If you in French, you've got all kinds of abusive terms for priests from the revolutionary period, Odon, I mean. But
slang for priest, curé, curton.
Voila. If you look at the Juré du Québec, the Quebec curses, the Jure, they're all related. Tabernacle, Osti, and what have you, but
Calice,
and what have you. But so it's but it should be clear that there is no basis for the warner, and nadhir is the good Arabic. If it's a loan word, it would be something like a monk or a Nazarite in Arabic, or a sacrifice. So you can, but it's certainly not a warner, and certainly not a reference to Muhammad.
Yeah. Just as an odd aside, there's a chapter of there's a variant of the Quran, one of the qira'ats called Al-Kisai, which is one of the names of the Al-Jisai. So
No, but these are these things that keep popping up, and I mean this is exactly the point. If you only stay within the Islamic tradition, it's hermetic. It makes perfect sense. You know, in splendid isolation, you can explain everything. But as soon as you look from outside, which is the only way to do it, you know, otherwise you write these books on the self-referentiality of the Quran in splendid isolation. But of course, these are the Alkacites, and I mean, it's clear what they are, and that this is a relic of that has found its way into the Islamic tradition.
Right, I'd agree. Yeah, this. Yeah. Well, thank you. We should probably end it here, but I mean, there's just so many questions.
Well, I mean, you have this, for example, like with the Septuagint, you've got a Jewish recension of this Septuagint, which is Aquila, which is of course related to the Targum Onkelos somehow. You know.
Yeah, that's another.
So you have these links there. You just have to look for them. But
yeah, no, there's questions on the Septuagint as well. At least, no, I'd say more on the Masoretic. But yeah, so shall we explore more of these questions next time, guys? We'll get together and plan, and we'll see what we tackle next.
Well, let me know. Yeah, gladly. So thank you for your time. The interesting discussion.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. It's been very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think in exactly the same theme as last week, probably now we all have a lot more questions. So let's see if we can actually reconvene very soon, and then we start with lots of questions and we tackle more topics. But it's been great.
Okay,
Thank you very much, Professor.
Next time, come with your questions. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, we're going to need longer hours. I think the hours, 60 minutes, are just too short for an hour to do this with, you know. So yeah, thank you.
You know, give a professor a microphone, and it's.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. We're very grateful. Very pleased to have you.
And the only thing left to say is go Scotland.
Go Scotland. All right.
Go Brazil.
Paul, you keep out of this.
Okay, let's keep it vague. The spirit of football will be with you. So
Right.
Right, guys. Thank you. And to the audience, thank you all very much. Please like, do share, subscribe. Whenever you like it, I think that gets sent out to 10 more people. So yeah, thank you, everyone. And God bless. We'll see you soon.